Today we are on to the final part of Leviticus, which is chapters 24 to 27. Part of me is quite relieved about this because Leviticus has been something of a slog. But it has been a case of saving the best for last, because we are finally going to find out what you get if you do what God tells you and what you get if you don't do what God tells you. In the meantime, though, we do have the case of a blasphemer who's put to death. And whilst we have seen some incidents of God killing people, I think this is fair to say this is the first one where an individual out of the big crowd has been singled out and then killed in this way. It arises as there's some sort of scrap breaks out between this guy and someone else. The offending chap curses using the name of God. It doesn't say what the curse is, unfortunately, which is a little annoying. I'm curious to know what you could actually say that would get you killed. God then decrees that everyone who heard it has to take the man outside the camp, because you don't want to kill people inside the camp, make a mess. They all lay their hands on him, which sounds like therefore not very many people, and then they stone him to death. Interestingly, this isn't a case like Nadab and Abihu. God sends out his big old fire tentacle and fries them alive. With this, he actually gets the people who heard the crime to take him outside and to stone him to death. And you kind of think, in modern society, even if you had been personally wronged by someone, could you and a crowd take them out and throw rocks at them until they died? It's quite a weird sort of idea, but interesting anyway to see it done in that way. It does make the point again that there's that differentiation between murder and God decreeing that someone should be killed, because God says a lot that the penalty for killing another human is to be killed, which wasn't true in Cain and Abel, but it's true now apparently. Again, I suppose showing evolution of rules over time and as society develops. We've got some gubbins with a new sort of super Sabbath, as it were. You have a whole year of Sabbath once every 7 years. So you plant your crops and everything for 6 years. On the 7th year, you don't plant anything and all the rest of it. It seems to be just some fairly, useful, I guess, practical advice on how to manage crops before fertiliser was invented. There's in this thing called the Year of Jubilee, which works out to every 49 years. Seems basically like some big old party, but ties back into the idea that there seems to be almost like a leasehold arrangement, that no one really owns land because belongs to God. So anybody who's selling land and all the rest of it, it can revert back to the previous owner on each of the year of the Jubilee. So prices are based on the period between the point of sale and the next Jubilee. Bit weird. There was an interesting question I was wondering at one point, where a lot of the rules seem to benefit the priests, as in all these sacrifices they made, quite often it's the priests that are eating them. And it occurred that sort of, if you were going to set up a cult, you couldn't be bothered to do any work, it might be a useful thing to say, I'm a super priest, you have to bring me stuff and then barbecue it and all the rest of it and just leave it there and go away and I'm going to eat it and happy days. But then Aaron seemed a little bit like a Muppet in some ways from some points. Not like a punk Muppet, but a little bit daft Muppet. It's difficult to tell, really, I suppose. And to be fair, this priestly job sounds like it's going to take up a lot of time, given there's at least 600,000 people, and Aaron and his remaining sons, and not many of them, are administering to all these people. So I guess, to be fair, they need to eat. So I guess it's not like they're having a high life in a palace or anything. He has to do a lot of stuff just to go into a tent and may get killed for it. Not to mention already lost 2 of his sons to doing it slightly wrong. So it would be a pretty naff cult, I think, if it was a cult. There's a bit where God says he wants people, the Israelites, to be good to the poor. Great, yeah, all fine. You can't take any other Israelites as slaves. Nice, okay. But it's okay if you take slaves from other nations. Again, this slavery thing feels problematic. There's a weird bit where God puts value on people, but it's done in the context of, if you're going to dedicate your child or something to God, then you have to pay a financial price in order to do this. And I cheated a little bit. I had to look up on the Google what this actual price was, because God sets it. And it's huge. It's actually really large. A couple of months' wages sort of thing. So, I mean, it's not something you would do lightly, which seems to be part of what it's for, in order just to deter people from sort of empty virtue signalling or something like that. You just, so I dedicate my son to the Lord sort of thing. It's like, yeah, but it's going to cost you 2 months' wages to do it. Yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's something along those sort of lines. That seems to make a lot of sense. The problematic bit, however, is that God is valuing men literally double what it is He is for women. And again, not a feminist or anything like that, but this theme of men versus women is very odd. It makes it feel a little bit like it's written by a man just oppressing women or something. But potentially, I suppose, in that day and age, the labour is basically what's happening in terms of producing anything. It's graft and all the rest of it, and men are certainly seen, rightly or wrongly, as being more valuable in that sense in terms of what they can contribute economically to the group. So I suppose in that sense it would make some sense that God is putting a higher price on giving away a boy than a girl. I think, maybe, ish. Don't know. It's not great anyway, but I think it's perhaps not quite as bad as it looks, or as straightforward as it looks. Finally, we are on to what do you get if you do good and what do you get if you do bad. This is basically what I've been looking for since we started the Bible. So come on, what's the deal? There's no mention of anything that carries on outside of a normal human lifespan. It is basically just you do as you're told and God will provide for you and you will conquer your enemies and you won't be conquered, and it's all pretty basic, to be fair. It's summarised pretty well as, I'm going to read it because, high tech. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws and you will live safely in the land. It's pretty simple, straightforward. And not a terrible deal. I mean, he's only asking them to try not to be too terrible in the sinning, acknowledge God, do your little routines for your repentance and all the rest of it, and you're going to be okay. It's reasonable, I suppose, if unexciting. The fun comes when we talk about what you get as punishment if you don't do it. And again, this has a little bit of a vibe like Scrappy Doo, Hold Me Back, as God escalating in sense of if you do this, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. If you still don't do what I tell you, I'm going to do this. And if you still don't do it, I'm going to do this. And it's just whole thing builds up. To basically summarise, is basically God is going to throw everything out of the kitchen sink at you, plagues and the lot, invasions and everything, if you don't do as you're told. So it's a bit of a lopsided deal. It's if you do good, you'll get the basics of life. Nothing particularly fancy, but not terrible. If you don't do as you're told, then absolute donkey dropping storm dropped on you and all your family and your whole society. So yeah, I sort of hope for something more than that, I suppose. I mean, obviously it moves on because I'm aware that the talk of heaven is going to come in somewhere. But in this day and age, life is... I appreciate there are pockets of big problems still. But in general, for those of us in the West, life has never been as easy as it is now, and for all the things we can complain about. It would be worse pretty much had we been born anywhere else or any other time in history. So it's not a particularly valuable... It doesn't feel like a particularly valuable reward to be told that basically you're going to have everything kind of basically work out okay when you've got a roof over your head, you can afford to get Tesco to bring your food round to you, you've got a nice big flat screen telly you can sit and watch and be comfy and warm. So again, that sort of suggests that reward is of its time. It's just interesting, there's just no mention of any sort of idea of anything existing after the mortal lifespan or anything like that. But yeah, so that's Leviticus. I mean, again, a bit of hard going, but some really interesting ideas and all the rest of it. After this, the next video will be just a general summary. I won't look at anything specific in the story. It's just that trying to put it in context with Genesis and Exodus. Remember, 3 to remember now. But yeah, so just the summary to come, and then we'll be on to the Book of Numbers to see what that's about. Hopefully not about maths. I assume it's unlikely to be about maths.